Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Minh and I'm your host for today from NDIS Property Australia here in Brisbane. And you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today's topic is AUSHOMES, and we have a guest speaker, Josh Donaghey from AUSHOMES in Brisbane here. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Minh. Thank you for having me.
Mate, tell us more about you, who you are, what you do in AUSHOMES and the company AUSHOMES.
Yeah, Minh, was a former accountant. I came across to the building company about 6-7 years ago. AUSHOMES has been around for about 27 years. My background is working in a variety of different development projects, so development and sort of multi-unit as well as SDA type dwellings. Really have enjoyed the space with SDA and getting to know all the different partners and participants along the way, and it's quite a rewarding field to be working in at the moment.
That's great to hear. So how have you found as a business the building industry the last 6 to 12 months?
Challenging, extremely challenging. Obviously, there's been a lot of builders that have struggled a lot over the last year. Cash flow's been a big issue, and that's been a result of record levels of demand, coupled with a particularly bad sort of weather pattern over the last 12 months. So the rain has just sort of exacerbated problems with supply chains that are already stretched. We've found it extremely challenging. It's extremely challenging building environment. The inflation factor has also meant that a lot of the margins just are constantly getting eroded. You'll declare a job with X dollars in it, and by the time you're finished, you're actually losing money. So a lot of builders obviously have just run out of cash and physically can't finish the projects. In our case, we're pretty quick to react to the inflationary pressure from our suppliers, and so we did increase prices along the way to sort of counter it. But nevertheless, it's still been very, very challenging. Building periods are also blowing out a little bit. We were typically building an SDA house in about 6 months. They're now running on average between 9 to 12.
Well, that's good. 9 to 12 months is still better than most of the industry out there, I guess. Yeah.
Mm.
Mate, when do you think it will get better for the industry in South-East Queensland, do you think?
Look, I think it's already starting to improve. The interest rate rises have sort of been a welcome change. It's sort of curtailed demand a lot, and it's sort of helped helped our suppliers and our trades catch up. As well as that, the weather has been fortunate for us recently. We've had a good dry spell. So that hasn't been a factor in delays. So I think the pricing on the material and labour side is probably starting to peak out, and I don't expect that to continue at the same rate it has over the last 12 to 18 months. And I do think the build durations have probably peaked as well, and I think they're starting to come in. On our books, as I said, we were showing about 9 to 12 months for a typical SDA. That time is starting to come in, sort of 7 months, and I expect by the end of the year we should be back down to 6 months again duration. Are
your normal builds the same duration as the SDA builds?
Pretty much. The SDAs are a little bit longer at the back end to work through all the audit process. So there is probably about another 3 to 4 weeks at the end for the audit side, and there is a little bit more work involved. Quite a lot more work involved in the house itself in terms of, the fit out and all that sort of stuff. So you're probably losing about another month there. So I'd say on average, an SDA house would be about 2 months longer than a standard typical dwelling.
Gotcha. So with AUSHOMES being around for 22, 23 years, how long have you guys been playing in the SDA field for?
We started playing about 4 years ago, and, been pretty heavily into it over the last 2 to 3. It had a fairly steep learning curve. with the SDA design guidelines and all the different requirements. So that was something that took a little bit of time for us, our estimators and our supervisors to sort of come to terms with and get their head around the different specific requirements for SDA housing. The requirements are, in a lot of instances, on top of sort of just the minimum AS 1428 requirements that, a lot of the foremen are familiar with. So it's been a steep learning curve, but once you're on top of it, it's sort of, they just become like any other building.
That's great to see you guys embracing that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What has your team learned along the way from the very early days when you first began to where you are now? I'm sure there's a big difference from the start and where you are now. What, in your mind, do you think you guys learned the most about this process, this journey, sorry?
I think it's probably the biggest thing is around being proactive in terms of making sure that, we're implementing things in the design standard at the start. So making sure that the designs are correct to begin with, because changing things, obviously, during construction is expensive at the best of times. But when it comes to SDA, in some instances, it's actually almost impossible to change it because your hallways and all your widths and your circulation spaces are set dimensions. So making sure that the design at the front end is 100% correct is critically important on SDA housing. And then in addition to that, just making sure the specifications, so things that are specified, sort of have the tick of approval by the auditing side as well, to make sure that when we get to the end, the sinks or the tapware or toilets and all that sort of stuff are compliant from the start, and that we're not going to have to go back and change them over at the end.
Speaking of which, what have you seen work and not work in the SDA building game?
I suppose the earlier configurations of housing, a lot of our sort of investors were going in and building, 3 to 4 bedroom plus high physical support dwellings. In meeting with a lot of the providers and the participants themselves, a lot of them sort of were giving feedback that, the 4 bedroom high physical support SDA model isn't one that's necessarily the most popular with participants and what they're necessarily looking for. And so I think at the start, it was almost the investors were sort of saying, well, this is what's, this is what the participants should be living in. And the feedback from the providers was, well, no, this is what we actually want. And so the housing model, I think, sort of adapted and evolved over time to suit what the participants were actually asking for.
Gotcha. So are your houses now more 3-bedder, OOA plus 2 participant resident houses now? Yeah,
that would be the typical. We also are doing quite a lot of sort of 1-bed SDA plus OOA dual occupancy style dwellings, where you have side-by-side units with one SDA dwelling, one SDA room per dwelling. Both models have been pretty successful. I haven't seen a lot recently of the larger, 4-bedroom or 3-bedroom SDA high phys models. That seems to have fallen a bit by the wayside.
So speaking of dual occupancy, have you done many of those ones in SDA?
Yeah, quite a few. So it's been pretty popular. In a lot of instances, they've had, like a spare room in the dual occupancy so that it could be used for a family member or, a different level of participant that may not be, say, high phys. It could be like fully accessible participant. So the dual occupancy model has been pretty hybrid. And it might be the case that you have one high phys side and one, say, fully accessible side, or one high phys side, and then the other side is just a standard dual occupancy for a standard tenant. Obviously seeing super high vacancy or, super low vacancy rates in most regional areas in South-East Queensland. So it's a pretty good hybrid model to have, a standard dwelling house plus a high phys unit in a lot of instances.
So these dual locks you guys have been doing, are they being like 3+2 or 3+1 kind of spec design between the sides?
Pretty much, yeah. So some have been two, like one SDA per side plus a carers or alternate accommodation room on each side, and some have been 3-bed.
Are you say would it be OOA plus 1, OOA plus 1?
Yeah.
That's a duplex, isn't it? Duplex.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay. Is the cost to doing a duplex much more substantially more than a dual lock because of the time frame to lodge for DA and BA and
Yeah,
structure?
yeah. Well, yeah. So a lot of them are going through as community residences. So they aren't necessarily having a material change of use application done over the top of them. If the intention is to strata title the dwelling, for example, and sell them off separately, in those instances, yes, typically they'll require a material change of use, and that does have pretty long timeframes. Like at the moment, our average MCU time is sort of 3 months typically to do a DA. So normally a proper MCU dual occupancy is taking about a year to 15 months to build when you include the DA timeframes.
Well, when I first met you a year and a half ago, you said to me it was very important for you to know that the channels that you work with have an associated provider with the channel partner.
Yes.
Is that still the case with your business?
Very much.
Can you explain why to our listeners why that's important to you as a business, AUSHOMES, that who you do business with, they are associated with providers? Why is that important?
Well, mainly because most of our business, we have really no retail presence as an organisation. Our whole presence is based on referral and repeat business. And so for us, it's really critically important that the investors have if there's an investor involved, that they have a really good experience, which includes making sure they have a tenant. Now, most of the time, having a provider on board and linked in is sort of essential because it's critical to finding the tenant, and having them on board at the beginning ensures that the right house is being built for the right tenant. A lot of the time, the SDA dwellings are built bespoke for a particular provider's tenant in mind, and so making sure that they're on board at the beginning just helps to ensure that there will be a tenant at the end, and that investor comes back and does another project with us.
That's great. So speaking of investors, what's the experience that the investor goes through in terms of engaging AUSHOMES from the EOI process onwards?
Yeah, so typically we'll get involved with the provider and the investor at the start. So we have sort of a three-way conversation to get feedback on, hey, this is what the tenant demand is, this is what we're looking for. And then, we'll speak also with the investor and go, well, what sort of budget are we working to? And then from there, we look at the land as well. So if the investor's bringing the land to us, or if we're finding the land for the investor, knowing what the provider's wanting to put on that block is essential. So we'll work with them to work through the land options and make sure it all works. And that can include things like making sure that the site is going to be suitable for an SDA. In a lot of instances, when we first started working together, there were clients bringing us blocks of land to do an SDA dwelling, and they had 5-6 meters worth of fall on them, which just really wasn't suitable for a high physical support dwelling. So we'll work with the investor and the provider to make sure that the right house is being put on the right lot, and that the price meets the budget. And then we will then sort of hold them through the process in terms of colour selections and making sure that the specification is correct for the participant need.
With regards to HPS, is there much of variations options list that investors can choose from when they're talking to you at the very start with the provider? I mean, how do I say this? What kinds of options are on that variation list that you present to investors and providers to consider? Yes.
Yeah. So there obviously is the SDA design standard has a minimum that we have to achieve. So that's the standard specification for, say, a high physical support house that we would provide. On top of that, there is a whole lot extra that can be included in the fit out, which include things as simple as different color selections to, full ceiling rails and hoists. Automation is standard in most instances, but you don't necessarily need the door actuators on a lot of houses. So depending on how far an investor wants to go, they can fully automate the house with full door actuators, as well as, the ceiling rails and hoists as well. And then you can go as far as different kitchen appliances to what our standard high physical support appliances are. As long as they're still compliant, we still have to make sure they're compliant, but there are a myriad of upgrades that they can select from, which our colour consultant will go through with them at the time.
Sure. Any unusual requests made so far for HPS?
Not really. All we tend to find is that a lot of our investors, or some of our investors, will have it'll be a family relative that they're building the house for, and so they'll have very specific requests around certain fit out items that will suit that particular tenant. And so it can be things like in the case of a robust house, where the family might have said to us, look, we just don't want the participant to have access to the kitchen, for example. So we would fully build the kitchen in so that it's its own self-contained room. Heaps of different things like that, whereby we'll try and accommodate the particular participant in terms of design as well as specification.
That's great. I mean, it's very rare to see a builder do an enclosed kitchen or a robust home, but I think it's great that you're doing that. Yeah. Speaking of robust, what's your feedback on that? Have you done many of those compared to HBS and your numbers? What's in your...
Yeah. So the higher rate, high physical support has certainly been a dominant category versus robust. I think a lot of that has just been to do with land availability. In most instances, robust dwellings will require land that's a bit detached or separate from the neighbour, and so that can be hard to find. And the high physical support's been a little bit easier in that respect. With that said, we have done quite a few robust dwellings. They are a bit more difficult in terms of the participant requirement. They are very, very, because it's behavioural house, they tend to be a bit more restrictive in what you can do with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how many have you done with robust, may I ask?
Total, we've done about 14 robust dwellings in total, compared to high piers, which would be, probably over 40 high piers. Gotcha. What about IL, FA? Do you do many of those? Yep, we've done a few. Again, they're sort of probably... they're sort of more of that hybrid model where people will be doing a high piers and incorporate an FA maybe on one side of a dual occupancy or something. But yes, we have done quite a few. I have also done quite a few standalone houses in IL, which have been pretty good. I'd say we only would have done probably about 10 of them in total.
Oh, good. Yeah. I think we need more IL houses out there in the market.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Too much focus have been put on to HBS the last 2 years or so, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So what other challenges do you see with SDA as a building company?
Look, I think from my perspective, the first question I have is around saturation. So just being aware that, as you said, that there is a huge demand for a lot more IL and FA, even robust style housing. And we have been building a lot of high FIS, and just making sure that in certain pockets of that hasn't been a saturated design category would be my first query. From a building perspective, the construction code is changing, basically the 1st of September. The changes in the construction code aren't likely to be a huge issue for SDA housing. There are some changes to standard housing which are actually moving more toward Living Housing Australia sort of guidelines. So I think, if anything, that's not really going to impact it at all. However, there have been some movements to upgrade the energy efficiency requirements on houses to a 7-star energy rating. So that's likely to have an impact in terms of price, whereby we have to increase wall bats and ceiling bats and glazed windows and whatever to achieve those sort of ratings. So that's likely to be an issue going forward.
Speaking of IL, I want to ask you a question from a construction point of view. A provider once told me a few months ago that most of the IL participants are living in a sill home at the moment.
Right.
With the livable housing changes Australia-wide being more towards an IL standard, we may see less IL SDA homes being built because the standards is being increased. What's your feedback on that comment there?
My feeling is that won't actually necessarily be the case, because the standard change is only partial. Is a partial change toward the Living Housing Australia guidelines. For example, it requires at least one accessible entry into the house, but that isn't required for every single exit point to the property. So it's not necessarily required for al fresco doors. It's not necessarily required for your front door. You can comply with the new code just by having an entry door from your garage, for example, into the house. So I still think there's to do SDA dwellings properly and to get the right certification for them, there's still quite a lot more work than just the minimum of the new construction code.
So what areas have AUSHOMES been building in for SDA?
Like localities?
Yeah.
So quite a lot in Toowoomba, Warwick, some in Brisbane if we can get land, Redlands, Sunshine Coast, Logan City Council, pretty much every major local government council in South-East Queensland. We're also pushing into Gympie as well.
Oh, good. Gympie has a lot of demand from HBS out there.
Yeah.
So are you actually in Gympie now?
We are in Gympie now, yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I think we may have a few clients with blocks of land up there for sure.
Yeah.
Any words of advice for potential investors considering SDA?
Just my biggest thing is make sure that you have a really strong provider on board with you. It makes the whole process a lot less stressful. Being sure that you've got that provider to, guide you in terms of this is what the tenant demand is. When we first started, as I said, we had a lot of investors saying what they thought the tenants were going to want. And I think that was the wrong approach. I think the approach needs to be participant-led. And so, getting feedback from the providers is critical in that participant-led approach.
Exactly. Now, at the other extreme spectrum, what words of advice do you have for any builder or developer listening to the show right now on their potential entry into SDA construction, NDIS construction?
Any builder entering it, my commiserations for the next year, because it's going to be a bit of a curve. My biggest thing would be just to really drill into the SDA design guideline and just know it back to front, to be honest. Make sure that your draftsperson, whoever's drawing your plans, is fully across the SDA design guideline. And make sure you get it audited, at the design stage by an SDA, accredited SDA assessor, to make sure that everything's compliant, which will just make the SDA audit at the end a million times easier.
Do you come across many owner or occupier participants who want to design and build their own SDA for them to live in themselves?
It's mainly around family. So it's not so much that they're necessarily owner occupier. It's more the family sort of doing the house for a relative or whatever. That's very common at the moment. And that's actually, we kind of really enjoy doing that because it allows us to design bespoke the house for the particular participant. Yeah.
Oh, that's good, mate. Mate, thank you so much for your time, taking time out of your day. I know you're very busy on your end. This gives us a very good perspective as to what it takes for a building company like AUSHOMES to get involved and maintain their presence in the SDA NDIS sector. Really appreciate your time, Josh. I guess my last words are, well, I know you work with channels, right? Partners. But if other agents around Australia want to get in contact with you or other groups as well, what's the best way to contact you guys?
Just
website and
just through the website aushomes.com.au. Where just get in touch with us. We're more than happy to have a chat to you. As I said, we have providers that we work with, and we're more than happy to give you their details. And also, we're happy to work with any providers that people may want to wish to work with themselves.
So, one last question, because you are a wholesale business, you don't deal directly with the public. I mean, this is a very complex topic, SDA.
Yeah.
If a client rang you directly to your office, I mean, what's your response to the inquiry? Would you guess?
Yeah, so we'll certainly have a chat to the client. Basically, what I've just explained today is how I would respond to them. I basically say, do you have a provider and do you have land? And that's sort of my first two questions.
Yeah.
If they say no, we don't have a provider, I'm more than happy to introduce them to some. But alternatively, my recommendation is make sure they come in with a provider first. It just makes things a lot easier. Just a lot more fluid as well.
Yeah, it's important to race because We don't want 100 people ringing you next week, next month, saying, "Hey, Josh, I heard you on the podcast. Can you help me out here?"
Yeah.
Resources. You're not resourced to help out people directly with that, are you? No.
Not really. No, we don't. We don't actively sell, so we're not. We're really the builder first and foremost. So it would be important to contact a provider or someone who could facilitate that, and then by all means, we're happy to build the dwelling for them.
Mm-hmm. So any listeners out there in South-East Queensland or interstate, if you have land, you want to work with a builder to build an SDA home, make sure it's flat, it complies. Talk to your provider you have, or talk to the team at AUSHOMES here, and do not contact the office if you have no idea about SDA, because SDA is a very complex topic, my friend, isn't it?
It is. It's been a long learning curve for everybody, but we're pretty proficient now, and more than happy to build the house.
Good, Josh. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate your efforts here, and we look forward to talking to you more later on down the track.
Awesome. Thanks, Minh.
Thanks, mate. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Yeah, bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.